Good morning and a very warm welcome. My name is Gully Francis Dechani and I'm the Bishop of Loughborough and soon to be the Church of England's new lead bishop for housing. I have the privilege of welcoming you to this event on behalf of the Archbishop of Canterbury and York's Commission for Housing, Church and Community. The Commission has spent nearly 2 years developing a broad range of actions and recommendations to tackle the housing crisis, starting with what the Church of England can do with its own land and resources, but also looking at what government and others can do. This is one of the key messages from the report, that every actor in the housing market, landowners, developers, landlords and homeowners, as well as government, has a collective responsibility to act now more than ever. After launching the report on Sunday, we've come together this morning to discuss how we can begin to turn this positive vision of housing and community into a reality in the places where we live, work and minister. We have about an hour and a half together, and in a moment, Archbishop Justin will give us a brief overview of the report's main findings. And then we have 2 panels of distinguished speakers who are actively involved in tackling the housing crisis in all kinds of different ways, through direct provision, research, policy making, campaigning, and local action. We look forward to hearing their views on what the Commission's vision means, first for the nation and then for the Church. There'll also be plenty of time for questions from the audience, so do please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll endeavour to address as many of your questions as possible. Please also feel free to tweet about this webinar using #ABCHousing. Before we begin, I want, if I may, just to say 2 brief thank yous. First, to Jessie Carter and the Bristol Housing Festival for all the behind-the-scenes help in organising and running this webinar. It wouldn't have been possible without you. And secondly, a huge thank you to the many organisations and individuals that have endorsed and helped disseminate the Commission's recommendations over the last few days. Many of you are represented here at this event. We're enormously grateful for your support, and we look forward very much to working with you in the future. So it's now my great pleasure to hand over to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's going to offer an overview of the Commission's findings and recommendations. Archbishop Justin.
Good morning to everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. We meet at a moment of extraordinary turning points. The last 12 months have stripped the paper off many of the cracks which are in our society and have brought us to a fresh recognition of our fragility and a fresh sense of our belonging to one another. This is a moment of hope as well as lament. We look back at 120,000 people who've died, millions who've not been able to attend funerals, the disruption of economy, the disruption of education, the key workers, especially in the health service, who are exhausted. And in all those areas, we recognize that now is the start of rebuilding our society and our country for the future. And at the heart of that rebuilding has to be literally a physical rebuilding, because there are 8 million people living in substandard housing. That is one of the headlines of this remarkable report. And before I go any further, I want to say thank you to Charlie Arbuthnot, who has chaired it, to Graham Tomlin, who is the vice chair, who's Bishop of Kensington, and in whose area is Grenfell Tower. And both Charlie and Graham have led an extraordinary team of people of different faith backgrounds, of no faith, who are all experts in different areas of housing. They come with a wide range of views. They've been superbly chaired to bring together what I think, it's an independent report, I can't claim any credit for it, but what I think is an outstanding document. For our country, this is a beverage moment. And for that moment, this report comes just appropriately. I hope too that this report will spur the Church of England to use its land, not its churches, but its land, to spearhead the building of extraordinary and wonderful communities for the future. There are many themes running through the report, and I just want to take 3 or 4 of them. The first of them is affordability. It's certainly the case that affordability of housing is as important as availability. I suspect that Rolls-Royces are available to anyone who wants one. It's just they're not very affordable. And affordability needs to mean what most of us mean by affordability. In other words, that an ordinary person can afford it, not some calculation based on surrounding values of rent or the cost of buying, but something that people locally can afford. And once you have that test passed, you've then got to build not just houses, but communities. Some 3 years ago, I published a book which was called Reimagining Britain. And when I got to the chapter on housing, because housing has been one of those things that the church has been involved in for 1,000 years through almshouses, through housing associations and many other things. When I got to the bit on housing, I rang, among others, Charlie. He didn't know he was being interviewed to do this job, but he was. I didn't know that either, because we hadn't thought of the panel, of the report at the time, the commission. But I said to him, what was his key saying? And he said, we don't need just more houses, we need communities. So the second thing is that this is about building communities. And we need to root housing in a vision of what a good house looks like. We know what good health care looks like in the NHS. It's free at the point of delivery, and the best possible care free at the point of delivery or the point of need. But we don't have an equivalent pithy, short, memorable saying for what great housing is. And this report has come up with a vision, 5 values of what makes good housing, that it's sustainable, it's environmentally friendly, it's you don't have to spend a fortune on heating it and lighting it, that it's sustainable, that it's safe, not like Grenfell, safe not only from other people, but safe to live in, that it's sociable, that it invites other people around. You can build community in it, that it is secure, that you will be there. It's stable. You'll be there for years. You can put your roots down, and it's satisfying. That it's beautiful. It's where you feel when you go to, you sit down, you think, I'm home. I'm home. This is home. We want these values to be clear targets, which we work back from. Clear targets of the kind of housing, clear targets for the quantity of housing, clear targets for community for the next 20 years. Over the last 40 or 50 years, we have failed to do that. More children are in substandard housing now than they were when Ken Loach produced Cathy Come Home. And we want every part of society to take part in this. The church needs to lead the way. I appeal to the church to respond to this challenging, demanding, and at times critical report, but also to government, to landowners, to developers, and to individuals. There are short-term wins and long-term wins. I've talked about the long-term, but at the short term, one of the things that is affecting housing is our benefit system. The bedroom tax, as it's called, the other things that have come in over many years. We want good homes which are affordable and which the poorest are able to live in well. As Shelter said in their endorsement, homelessness isn't inevitable. It's the result of decades of political failure to build social homes. This is the reason why over 250,000 people are homeless or in temporary accommodation. Let's step forward on this, not as a party political thing, but with a clear commitment to building great homes for a great country.
Thank you very much indeed, Archbishop Justin. I'm now going to introduce our first three panelists who will be sharing their thoughts on what the Commission's vision means for the nation, for government, and for other actors in the housing market as well. We've asked them to speak for no more than 3 minutes each, please, to allow plenty of time for questions. So I invite our panelists for this particular panel to switch on their cameras, please, and I'll introduce all of them together. First is Helen Barnard, who's Acting Director at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, where she's worked both across policy and analysis, most recently leading the Policy and Partnerships team to develop new solutions to solve poverty. Next is Danny Kruger, who is the MP for the Devizes constituency in Wiltshire and has worked in journalism and politics, most recently as the Prime Minister's political secretary. Danny is lead author of the Levelling Up Our Communities report. And then we have Fiona Fletcher-Smith, who is Chief Executive of the L&Q Group, one of the largest housing associations in the country. Prior to joining L&Q, Fiona was the Executive Director for Development, Enterprise and Environment at the Greater London Authority. And also for the Q&A panel, we'll be joined by Sir Robert Devereux, who's been a member of the Housing Commission and was formerly Permanent Secretary at the Department of Work and Pensions. Sir Robert has led the Commission's work on the structural causes of the housing crisis and on policy recommendations to government. So Helen, can I invite you please to kick us off and to share your opening thoughts with us?
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to the Archbishop and to the Commission for this report. It is a fantastic piece of work. And I think it's come at a really good moment, which you couldn't have predicted, of course, when, as you say, we have a moment of decision to make. The thing I think I like best about this report is it situates those with the greatest need at the heart of fixing the housing crisis. Because at the moment, our housing system actively makes poverty worse. Millions of people are suffering in cramped, damp, mouldy homes, particularly those renting from private landlords. High housing costs hold people back. They mean that people have to dip into the food budget just to keep a roof over their head. And at the heart of this is, as the report says, it's not just about we haven't got enough homes. It's that we haven't got enough homes that people on low incomes can afford in the places where they need to live. And that's what we need to fix. I think the couple of things that the way this report approaches this that I think are particularly good are, first of all, it accepts there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that will fix this. We need a long-term strategy that includes looking at supply, at land values, at the quality of the homes we build, and at the social security system. And I think that call for a long-term housing strategy with people in poverty at its heart, I think that's something that a lot of people can get behind in the sector and more broadly. And I think this is the moment to do it, because we know that coming out of the public health crisis from the pandemic, we know two things. One is the importance of a safe, warm home you can afford has been brought home to us in an incredibly powerful way. And we also know that we are going to need to invest in economic stimulus. We need to get the economy going. Investing in housing is one of the best ways you can do that. And investing in social housing means you get all the benefits of jobs and so on. You also get the benefits of reducing the housing benefit bill, reducing the universal credit bill, and crucially, reducing the stress and anxiety that it means to people who are stuck in a housing system where they're living somewhere unhealthy and they're also getting into debt to try and stay there. So I think this is a moment where we can come together and we can solve this. The last thing I'd say is I really liked in the report, there's a focus on voice, on listening to tenants. I think I would urge us all to actually go a bit further than that, to say that across all these approaches, whether it's those of us in the sector developing policies, the church's work with its own land, that we should put not only voice, but actually co-design, working with people to design solutions at the heart of everything we do. Because I think one of the features of our housing system has been how far it has done things to people and not with them. And so much of the problems and of the tragedies in recent years have come from not listening to people who are at the heart of this, not trusting their expertise. So I would like this to be a moment that we change that we commit to designing with people how we create a housing system that frees people from poverty and means that everybody can have a home that is safe, is warm, is secure, and in a community that they can properly participate in. I'll stop there because I know Bishop Gully needs to keep us to time, but thank you very much for letting me take part in this today.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen, for your contribution. Danny, shall we come to you next, please?
Thank you very much indeed, and a great pleasure to be with you all. I was introduced as having worked in journalism and politics before being an MP, which is true, but I also spent 15 years running charities, working with ex-offenders and with children and families at risk, and learned there how absolutely central housing is to all the wider social challenges that we engage with and try and deal with in isolation. So and then because it's becoming an MP, sort of discovered a lot about rural housing problems and the impact of housing on rural poverty too. So this is central to everything. I echo the points that have been made, and indeed what Helen's just been saying. I mean, I particularly resonate with what the Archbishop said about this moment, both of lament and of hope. Something is happening in our culture and in our political conversation, which is enormously positive. And I think we are at a Beveridge moment. I think something very powerful is happening. And as the Archbishop said, fundamentally, we need communities to drive social policy, and we need to put communities at the heart of our thinking about policy and obviously housing. Obviously, Beveridge agreed with that, and he regretted years after his famous report had borne fruit with the welfare state that element of his recommendations hadn't been properly put into policy. And in a sense, it's the unfinished part of the work of the 20th century social reform, is to put communities at the heart of politics and policy. And I think the elements of a community-driven agenda and housing, as in other areas, are that it's local, it's neighbourly. As we've seen over the last year, we have an amazing resource in our communities. That's the report that I did last year, was about building on this spirit of solidarity among neighbours, which is this wonderful resource for our country. And then thirdly, it's entrepreneurial. And this is the point I want to just make in this context. I think there's something very powerful about social enterprise, about the spirit of innovation, doing it yourself, getting together some neighbours and some experts and finding a way. And if we're thinking about housing, the opportunity, I think, to increase both availability but affordability too, through a much more bottom-up vision of how we deliver the housing target. And for me, I agree with the point that there's no silver bullet, but I think there is a key, a sort of philosophical and policy key to this challenge that could unlock the changes we needed. And that, for me, is the community land trust model, which I know will only ever be, well, I expect will only ever be a minority of the new housing that we're going to see and that we need. But in a sense, I think it's the sort of point of the spear to make the change that we needed, because that model, which is, as I say, local, neighbourly and entrepreneurial, is about affordability. Most explicitly, it's about making sure that there are houses that at social rent or to buy at affordable prices for the long term. But it's about working with landlords, and there is and the report demonstrates this. There is a real appetite among landlords for providing land for affordable long-term housing if they know that it's going to be long-term and it's going to benefit local people. And I think we can break the stranglehold of the big developers and break through all the dysfunctions in the planning system and land banking and all the rest of it, if we really put rocket boosters under the community land trust movement. And the government's committed to just put more money into the community housing fund, which is good, but we need to do a lot more. So that's my sort of contribution in this. I really want to push as hard as we can at that, because for me that reconciles all the different tensions that we're trying to achieve here, and should command support politically across Parliament. So I hope we can. I really appreciate everything that's been done in this report. Very much echo all of its findings, and I hope we can really push on community ownership. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Danny. And finally, before we come to the Q&A, and do keep your questions coming, we are looking through them. But before we get to that, Fiona, can I invite you for your contribution, please?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to join everybody today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I too really welcome this report, but I'd like to delve back in history very briefly, because it's very relevant to the report and to our discussion today. So L&Q is one of the biggest housing associations in the country. We're also a major house builder, but we emerged in 1963 when a local vicar in Woolwich in South London recognised the terrible housing problems that his parishioners were having. He approached a group of businessmen locally, and 32 of them chipped in £2 each, so £64, to try and do something about it. And their dream was to end homelessness. That £64 became what is today a £12 billion charity. But I'm afraid the dream of ending homelessness is still that. It's a dream. So we do have a lot of work to do. I really love this report, because for me, as a person on the ground, trying to deliver, trying to do good things, this report is recognising that everybody needs to come together. It is about our citizens, our communities, it's about layers of government. We all have to work together to make this change. It is practical, it is pragmatic. You can really see something changing on the back of this report, and I'm not always in a position to say that. It also looks at that community voice and citizen voice that is outside the democratic process often, but is so vital and important to making things happen. And the final point for me that I adore about the report is it is seeking a depoliticisation at a national level of housing. It must be recognised that it is a vital part of the country's infrastructure for our health, our well-being and our economic development, and boy, are we going to need that soon. So I'd really endorse the report, and I'm looking forward to being part of that pragmatic and practical solution, whether it is through the work we've done with the church on our Limelight Centre in Trafford, or work I'm hoping to do in the Diocese of Chelmsford, more locally to London. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona. That's great. So we're going to get going now with some of the questions. I'm going to suggest that I pose them individually to panel members so that we can get through more of them rather than hearing responses from all of you. But if you wish to respond to any that haven't been posed particularly to you, please just raise your hand and I'll make sure that we do that. So we've got just about in the region of 20 minutes, and I'm going to start, if I may, with a question that I'll put initially to Helen, please. And this is a question: what change could be made quickly to provide immediate relief to those who are worst affected by the housing crisis now, including the rising numbers of households who are behind on their housing payments as a result of the pandemic?
Yes, it's a great question. So I think in the very immediate term, one thing that we'd like to see in the budget, which is coming next week, is a solution for the debt that's the rent arrears that have been built up. So we know probably more than 700,000 people have got into rent arrears over the course of the pandemic. And the danger is that at the point that evictions and so on start happening, we will see a wave of evictions and people being forced into homelessness because of that. So what we need to see is a kind of post-pandemic reset where we see the Chancellor put in money through something like discretionary housing payments to deal with that debt so that people aren't trying to go into a recovery still carrying it. So that's the very immediate thing. I think the second thing in the very short term is, back in the early days of the pandemic, one of the really bold, compassionate things the government did was to link local housing allowance with rents again, having broken that link years ago. Now that has been an absolute lifeline for people, but sadly what they've now said is they're going to freeze it in cash terms again, even though even in the last year rents have gone up. We really need that change, because otherwise we will see what happened since 2010 and 2015, even more so. The gap between the rent you have to pay and the support you get with that rent grows and grows and grows, until eventually the majority of people in the private rented sector are having to dip into other income to pay the rent. And that is one of the direct things that leads to people being trapped in poverty. So that social security support is essentially the short term, but it's not sustainable. You know, we need good quality social homes. So what we also want is to see the government very quickly increase the amount of money they're putting into the affordable homes programme, but crucially tilt the balance to social rented homes, which is what Archbishop Justin was talking about, the ones that are genuinely affordable for those on low incomes, rather than the other bit of it, which is called affordable, but isn't affordable to most people on low incomes.
Thank you very much, Helen. And just to say to all those attending, do please use the chat facility for any comments you want to make. We are recording this event and we'll look over those comments at the end. Moving now, Danny, a question for you, if I may. How in practice can we create a long-term housing plan that all parties can back?
Well, that would be good. And actually, I see in this space perhaps more reason for hope than in lots of other areas where it would also be really good to develop a long-term plan that all parties can sign up to. I think there's a recognition that the different parties will criticise each other's records, but really this is a multi-generational challenge that we are living with, and it requires a long-term solution. So, and actually there is some, I think, positive indications from across Parliament of a willingness to work together on this. And so, I mean, how to do it? I echo the points that have been made around voice. And repeat my point about a bottom-up solution. I mean, I think, and somebody's made the point in the chat, community-led housing or community-owned housing should be more the mainstream than a sort of interesting eccentricity, which it is at the moment. And if government were to indicate a willingness to really explore the opportunity for more bottom-up, more community-led, community-owned housing, we would achieve a political consensus on that could unlock more cooperation across the whole housing policy piece. And so I'm hoping for more investment through the Community Housing Fund, the Community Ownership Fund, and these sorts of models. I mean, I think that is the way to, if we're literally talking left and right, I think that is the way to bridge our political divide, because us Tories can enthuse about the entrepreneurialism and the innovation involved in it, and the left can enthuse about the affordability. So that's the way through. And I also think planning reform, we need to achieve some consensus there, because that's been contested for many years, and there is now proposals emerging from government on that. And again, I think if we could coalesce around more neighbourhood, really empowering neighbourhood planning, which was introduced by this government in a sense, but hasn't been as successful as it should have been. I think if we can approve that, we'll achieve political consensus as well.
Thank you, Danny. That's helpful. Fiona, if I can turn to you now with this next question, which has two parts. The housing association movement started as a social housing movement. Now it seems like many of them are volume house builders. How could housing associations return to their roots? And then someone has added a second part to the question: what can housing associations do above and beyond what they currently do?
Those are absolutely brilliant questions, and ones that occupy my mind as I'm working out our new corporate plan at the moment. Yes, we are in many cases volume house builders, but we do that for a reason. And the reason is that in order to be able to build the affordable housing that is my social purpose as an organisation, I need to make that profit to reinvest in the business. When I started working in housing many, many years ago, grants were available to build social housing at 110% of the cost of building that housing. Now the average grant I'm able to get is about 23% of the cost of building that home. So I need to make money in some other way to subsidise what I'm doing. So that is the reason we do it. That is the only reason we do it. Social purpose is at the heart of every housing association. We were set up to end the housing crisis in some way, and we are still working to do that. How do we reconnect that? We constantly remind ourselves. We've got to constantly ask that question. And I think for us, what's brilliant about the report is re-emphasising our resident voice, our community voice in what we do. We have a resident services board, for example, chaired by one of our group board members, who genuinely work together with us as a co-production of our services and our strategy, but also really determinedly hold us to account, particularly on social purpose. Where can we go further? We want to build more. We absolutely want to build more, but I will make no apology for the fact that for the next few years at least, I am determined to solve the cladding and fire safety problems and to invest in our stock, and that will take priority over building. So any profit I do make from the volume house building side of the business will be to resolve those problems so that we minimise any cost to our residents on that. Where we can go further in areas such as community involvement, empowering our residents to be able to engage, to be able to take part in the community planning that Danny mentions. So we are providing affordable housing for them where they don't have to worry about how to pay the rent. They don't have to worry about where food is going to come from because they have got spare income. Therefore, they have got the bandwidth to be able to engage in community planning. So I'm very keen that we do that. Jobs, training opportunities, linking what we do as a big employer and a big builder to our residents, their needs for training, their aspirations for work and employment opportunities. We can certainly do a lot more in that space. And then the final thing I would say is something that we have been pioneering is using our financial strength and our balance sheet where we can to support smaller organisations, particularly in London, BAME and very small associations, helping them with their ambitions to build homes by providing expertise and guidance at no cost to be able to share risk with them. And we want to continue doing more of that all over the country if we can manage it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. So Robert, I'm going to turn to you now as someone who's been a part of the Commission. And this is a question for you. Many housing economists would agree that unaffordable house prices are caused by demand being overstimulated by overgenerous tax exemptions to owner-occupiers who benefit from seeing their wealth accumulate. In sum, all of us who are owner-occupiers have a hand in the till, but politicians of all parties dare not recognise it. What better body is there than the church to make a challenge for the sake of gospel justice?
Oh, interesting question. Your analysis is obviously correct. I mean, insofar as there are tax breaks and the way the inheritance tax system works, capital gains, so these will indeed add into prices. Interestingly, work published by the Bank of England recently suggested that by far the most dominant factor in house price growth over the last 20 years has been the reduction in interest rates, not actually the tax policy changes. But you describe, ministers of both parties sort of not wanting to speak it. I mean, I think people are very aware of it. I mean, there's a practical reality here. If the housing affordability crisis is to be solved by reducing the open market price of houses, then more than 2/3 of the electorate have nearly all of their savings in one of these houses. I have some sympathy with Danny and his colleagues in thinking that's rather a difficult thing to do. So part of the reason that we have been very explicit in the report is to say, actually, it is not a very practical thing to think that the entire country is going to rise up and actually be happy to see the house price reduce. But that being the case, please let's not pretend that building more homes is also going to solve the affordability problem, which does take you into the world of different sorts of ownership, which is precisely what Danny described in a community land trust model. If we can get to a position where actually the sort of homes that are available at a much larger scale than CLTs are at the moment are ones which are backed by sufficient funds in the start to make them truly affordable in perpetuity, you have a different class of ownership, a different way of producing homes. And I just think that's a much more practical way of getting there than imagining that, that any politician is going to want to make a perpetual downward change in house prices.
Thank you very much indeed. Archbishop Justin, I'm going to start by putting this next question to you, although one or two other members of the panel may also want to comment. And this is the question. Having been engaged in delivering thousands of new homes, I know that public engagement always results in objections from the fortunate, especially to affordable housing or high density projects and in rural areas. How do you believe we can address the likely imbalance when we try and consult locally?
It's one of the things that is addressed very clearly in the report, and perhaps Robert will be able to pick up on that. The question is a very good one, is absolutely right. I think there are two or three things. There's one hard thing to say first, which is running through the report is a sixth S to add to the 5, and it is sacrifice. And it is to say that if you're going to solve a problem, it will always cost. It's a deeply Christianly and theologically rooted idea, but it's one that is intuitively true as well. So we have to bear in mind that wherever we build, there will be people who are not happy with that because it affects their own community. But I think the question comes back to something that I saw in a newspaper the other day. Is it going to cost us more to resolve this or not to resolve it? So for people in areas of, in rural areas where there's some glebe land, some church land, that could be used to build a dozen houses which are genuinely affordable, and we do need better definitions of that. I mean, the answer in the House of Lords last week from the government minister, a written answer to something I asked, said there is no definition of affordability. If we're going to do that, one of the things we say to people is, do you want a vibrant living community, or do you want one that is aging and dying, particularly in rural areas? Because if you want a vibrant living community, you're going to have to make space for young families who typically will not be able to afford, particularly in the areas around London and some of the more fashionable areas, will not be able to afford the kind of housing that people already have. And we need lower cost housing to make the communities have a permanent long-term life. And if we're going to do that, that is going to need, as Danny quite rightly said, new forms of ownership. It's, and Robert was just saying, new forms of ownership. It's also going to need people to recognise that their long-term interests for them and their children and grandchildren are going to be in thriving communities.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on the panel want to comment? Okay, great. Nothing to add.
Robert, I think.
Robert, yeah.
So I would just add one observation, which is, I mean, sometimes, you know, those local objections are actually to do with the pressure of housing on other facilities. And I guess that goes to the heart of the question about communities. I mean, you can't simply, you know, add more homes and then not have enough space in the surgery and in the school, etc. And so that's a good call out for communities. It's not a good reason for not doing the housing in the first place, but it just means it's a broader community problem, not just a raw housing problem.
Thank you. Danny, I'm going to turn back to you again, if I may, with this question, which is, since most of the dwellings that will exist in 2050 are already built, surely the priority must be to provide effective and sustainable refurbishment of existing homes. Clearly, this would have health and economic benefits, but this requires a step change in our construction industry, a substantial investment in training and quality assurance systems.
Well, that sounds right. I'm no expert, but it does strike me as a major opportunity for us, especially in the light of the crisis we're in at the moment, to develop a new vision for refurbing housing, and particularly for putting the what might sadly be a large number of young people who are facing unemployment to work in this space. I mean, there's a great opportunity, I think, to develop a new workforce of environmental retrofitters and insulators who can help to make to help us meet the net zero target while also making our homes more livable and affordable. So I'd support that principle. And really just wanted to echo a point that Justin made a minute ago about the mix of families. I just think that the overall focus must be on, yes, we need new housing, and I believe very strongly in filling in existing estates and villages rather than trying to think of major new developments on the edges of towns. But those need to be really about creating mixed communities that have a long-term life, and a vision around the role of young people in helping to equip, design the towns that they are going to grow up in. We hope, bring their own children up in. I think it's a very exciting vision for our country, and we should be engaging in a big conversation about the sort of places we want to create together and the role of young people in creating them.
Thank you, Danny. I think we're just going to try and squeeze in one final question. Helen, if you could be as brief as you're able in your answer, I'd appreciate that. And this is a question: what are your views on changing the views on affordable housing and the Nimbyism affordable housing brings?
So I think one of the things that we need to do is to engage people in a conversation about what kind of communities we want. I think that we need to engage people in a positive way, that actually building social housing is a way of freeing people from poverty, of building a more resilient community, and that we need to see that as a collective endeavour, not just as something that is being done to one place by somebody else. And I think we know people do care about poverty, and we know that they do care about community. So we need to harness those, I think.
Thank you, Helen. Fiona, I'm just wondering whether you want to add anything. You're nodding your head quite vigorously there.
Yes, no, I completely agree with that. I think once you scratch the surface with what we call Nimbyism, you find that people are concerned about where their children are going to live, how their children are going to afford to live in an area. And to Robert's earlier point, it is often about the pressure on services. So I think the planning system and whatever we do around 106 and levies, for example, has to recognise that people need access to transport, to shops, to GPs, dentists, all of that. And we need to recognise that those concerns are real. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry to say that we've run out of time for questions, but I want to give each of you just an opportunity we've got about 3 minutes left in total. So any brief final comments that, that each of you might want to offer, starting perhaps with Danny.
No, other than to thank the Commission for this work, and the point about hope and lament. It took the Second World War and the great tragedy there to generate the Beveridge report and to make the change that happened afterwards. It's if it's taken Grenfell Tower and a pandemic to make us really pay attention to the challenges of housing, then let's build on this moment. And I think, as I say, I think there's part of a general cultural shift which is underway, and it needs to really get underway in my party as much as anywhere, away from an idea that the individuals left to themselves and operating in a free market will sort everything out. We do need collective action and collective responsibility. I echo the point about sacrifice. I thought Graham Tomlin was great on the radio this morning making that point. It's not a word you hear enough on the Today programme. So I really honour the work that's being done here and really hope we can mainstream this kind of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Helen?
I'd echo that. I think the other thing I would say is we need to remember that we are dealing with a problem of scale. So we need to remember that what we need are around 100,000 more homes, low-cost homes every year to try and meet the need. So I think the solutions we need to come up with need to be at scale, as well as some of the kind of smaller, more imaginative things. And that's something that will need a partnership between government, communities, local authorities, housing associations.
Thank you. And Fiona?
Thank you. My final point would be, let's keep the momentum going. Let's just do this. We can do it. We can make a change, but it's got to be long-term, concerted, and everybody's got to be involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Sir Robert, do you want to add anything? You just need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, old tricks. I do think something that Danny said earlier is really quite important. I mean, in order for this to genuinely have legs across the political parties, there needs to be something in it for both sides. And I think that combination of the entrepreneurial stuff to do with getting on and doing things locally, in possibly the sort of community land trust model, has actually got all kinds of good properties on that. And it would be, a great thing to actually work that way through, because I think the debate is a bit stale and it needs to have some new ideas in it in order that both sides can agree on it.
And finally, Archbishop Justin.
I want to thank you. I want to pick up a couple, just very briefly. I agree with what Helen said. This is a problem of scale, and small answers to enormous problems are not going to solve the problem. I thought all the panelists have said some really important things. I think for me, keeping the focus on building communities, not just houses, of the services that go with it, the things that bind people together, and the long-term vision of what really good housing is like is also very important. Just round where I am now in Lambeth, there's all kinds of things from Peabody and all kinds of people who built absolutely wonderful, Braintree, who built wonderful houses the thick end of 100 years ago, which are still there and still really good places to live. That was a great moment.
Thank you, and I'm sorry there are many, many more great questions that we haven't had time to get to, but it's just a reminder that this is the beginning of something, and those questions will help propel us forward after we go on from this event. But for now, thank you very much to all of you, to Helen, Danny, Fiona, Robert, and to the Archbishop. And I'm going to turn now to introducing the next three speakers. So invite them to turn their cameras on, and those who've been part of this panel, please to switch your cameras off. And the next panel will be sharing their thoughts on what this vision of the Commission means for the Church, both at national and at local level. And on the panel we have, first of all, Adeola Ogunade, the founder of Hope for All, a Christian housing project in southeast London, which provides training and advice on housing issues to church leaders, congregations, and the wider community. Hope for All was one of the winners of the Cinnamon Project Lab 2020, which was awarded to church-led projects with the potential to grow and replicate across the UK. Next, Matthew Bolton, who is the Executive Director of Citizens UK. Matthew has pioneered community organising as a force for social change and democratic renewal. He was the lead organiser for the UK Living Wage campaign, which has now accredited nearly 7,000 living wage employers. And then Nick Pollock, who is head of planning at the Duchy of Cornwall and has worked in planning and development for nearly 30 years in London and then Bristol. I'm delighted to announce that Nick is being seconded part-time to the Church of England to lead a small executive team looking at how we can use our land and buildings missionally for social and environmental as well as financial benefits. And then for the Q&A, this time we'll also be joined by the chair of the Housing Commission, Charlie Arbuthnot. Charlie is a former funding advisor to housing associations and has led the Commission's work particularly on the missional use of church land and other assets. So this time, Adeola, I'm going to start with you, if I may, to share with us your contribution, please.
Thank you very much, Bishop Gully. It is a privilege and honor to be here today. Thank you, Archbishop of Canterbury and York, for this great initiative. Our vision at Hope for All is to train churches and their communities on early intervention and prevention, to identify early signs of tenancy problems, hazard awareness, prevention of homelessness, and to understand the basic housing laws. And we totally agree with the Archbishop's core values for what good housing should look like, which the report highlighted. We are setting new standards together. We believe churches should be part of the solution, and we understand and we are here to train churches on how to continue to be solution in their communities. We believe that homes should be affordable, sustainable, suitable, secure, safe, and stable. This could also be an antidote for mental health issues. We understand that consistent community-based project is the foundation of any good church and established church in order to create an inclusive community. And the church has always been seen as the safest place for any person. It is one of the most stable and influential organizations in history. Our training is targeted towards all churches that have a need for housing knowledge to break the cycle of poverty. And we believe this will help many churches that have housing estates in their communities where people are more likely to be victims of illegal eviction or harassment. Shelter is one of the basic amenities for any human being, and seeing the church becoming, part of this is great. And knowing that there will always be more demand than supply and people need affordable housing. We believe the church should continue with what we're doing to be part of the solution to empower our communities, and we would love to work with you to empower you, equip you, and train you appropriately. Faith without works is dead. Most local authorities are under pressure, huge pressure, with the numbers of homeless families that approach them daily, especially during this pandemic. And we would love to reduce the number of people that will be going through this channel. And if identified early, we can prevent most of it from happening. So if the churches can continue as part of the solution, if we can continue to provide early intervention, homelessness can be prevented, although we all believe it's inevitable. If homelessness is prevented, there will be a healthier and happier congregation, communities, and nation in general. Thank you. That will be my contribution for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adiola. Matthew, can we come to you next, please?
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's no doubt that this report and this event puts the Church of England centre stage in the efforts to solve the housing crisis. It's a real credit to all those involved. And it's a powerful and it's a unique combination to bring the moral voice of faith with the local presence of thousands of church and school communities, and this bold offer to put forward church land. And you can count on Citizens UK as a partner, because what this also says about the church, and why I really love this report, is it's not just a document to sit on a shelf or these days in a cloud somewhere. It's about action and about change. So on that basis, here are 3 things that we would be keen to work with you and this wider coalition on. First would be land. Could we leverage this Church of England leadership and encourage other civil society landowners to follow suit? There's real interest in the Methodist Church, in a number of multi-academy trusts such as Oasis, and some of the same barriers will need removing around best value, planning and funding, so better to work together. And some of the same solutions, like community land trusts that can lock affordability and community ownership in perpetuity. Second would be around funding. Let's work with MHCLG and their Affordable Homes programme to create some dedicated fund or process, the Civil Society Housing Partnership Fund, or a better name than that, that would support the Church of England and other civic landowners to get these good quality affordable homes built. It's great that Bishop Graham Tomlin will be together with us on the 3rd of March to meet with the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, to discuss this. Third would be around affordability, as has been mentioned several times, and as the report notes, there is so much so-called affordable housing costing up to 80% of market rate that is just simply not affordable. We need more social rent homes, there's no question about that, but we also need to redefine what the upper limit of affordable really means. It's widely recognised that for those on low and middle incomes, if they're forced to spend more than 1/3 of their income, it risks pushing that family into hardship and poverty. That's the affordability basis we've used for our community land trust housing developments in East London. And just like the living wage defines what people need to earn according to how much it actually costs to live based on human dignity, let's set the upper limit on what affordable means in terms of what people can actually afford, 1/3 of local average income, and campaign for government and others to follow. And finally, most importantly, this is about local community transformation and action. And if this report puts the Church of England centre stage nationally, it also invites the local parish to be a catalyst for social change in the neighbourhood. And this will only work if clergy and lay leaders catch the vision, step up and start making it happen in their neighbourhood. This is a really exciting prospect for social action and local leadership. And it's great to see the turnout here, 400 people ready to play their part. I saw someone in the chat, let's be a prophetic voice of welcome. That's Alison, so thank you for that great phrase. And again, at Citizens, we will be doing our utmost to see the 100 odd Church of England churches involved in Citizens to take a lead. So thank you again, great to be here, and credit to all those involved.
Thank you, Matthew. And finally, Nick.
Well, Bishop Gully, thank you so much for this amazing opportunity to lead and work with the executive team to implement the important findings of the Commission. I work with communities. I work with communities to grow and build community with new homes, jobs, green spaces and growing spaces, affordable housing integrated with market homes. And the report is packed with important recommendations and initiatives, and I commend it to you. And I want to draw out 3 points. Point 1 is action. This report is a call to action for the church to engage with government, MPs, local councils, stakeholders. And it really struck me actually that the Bible calls us to pray. It is by prayer and petition that we present our requests to God. And it is by petition that we need to petition these stakeholders, because we want to reduce the affordability gap and increase affordable housing supply, and to model the 5 values that homes must be sustainable, safe, stable, sociable, satisfying, and sacrificial. Point 2 is that we must collaborate and also celebrate. We need to connect and learn from others. And there are loads of really good examples of how change has come about from the grassroots, individuals who are challenging the lack of affordability or the lack of inclusion. And we need to learn from others and join up with others. And we invite dioceses and parishes to collaborate and partner with developers and institutions and others that commit to the 5 core values, and to create well-designed places to build community. And the third thing is example. We need, as a church, to lead by example, and we need to engage with communities, and we need to create places that build connectedness and rootedness. We need to seek better. We need to seek better homes, better outcomes, better environmental growth, and better positive social impact. And I believe that together, the church can build resilient communities and a lasting legacy. But I want to make clear that there are many people who will want to work with us, because, you know, it's well set out in the report that there are 300,000 acres of church land across this country. But we want to work with those who ascribe and commit to stewardship and ascribe and commit to the 5 values. It's really important that we create really fantastic places for people to settle. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And I'm really looking forward to working with you and learning from you and others in due course. So we come now to our questions. And the first one I'm going to pose, Matthew, to you. How can churches make a difference if they're concerned about the impact of the housing crisis on their community?
There are many ways. I mean, the particular opportunity that this report underlines is that actually, you know, there is land held by the Church of England, held by other civil society landowners, and every community experiences, as Adiola so eloquently put, you know, the problems of the housing crisis in our friends and neighbours, the people who sit next to us at church. And so that's the opportunity for people to come together to create a plan to map what land there might be in the area, and to, whether it's through a community land trust or through another form of community-led housing, to really be part of the solution. And we've seen that in, for example, St George in the East in Shadwell right now. They're working on a community land trust project together with the Church of England Primary School and the local Muslim community, and they will see a permanently, genuinely affordable housing development on what was unused Transport for London land. So there are examples out there, and yeah, this effort could make a real, you know, step change.
Thank you, Matthew. Nick, I'm going to come to you next with this question. When planning new housing developments, is it possible to focus fully on social and environmental impact and still make money? And I'm going to ask you, if possible, to address this in relation in particular to the use of church land.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I believe with a passion that in order to build communities, you need to start with the community. That is to engage with existing communities who know their place best. And actually, if you build places that people want to, you know, to connect people, then actually, I find that, you know, the key components of places is to provide really good social infrastructure, community infrastructure, and to protect the environment. I mean, it's made clear, I thought it was a lovely quote in the report, that a good home is a place that enables us to live in harmony with the natural environment. We need green spaces, we need growing spaces. It's showing me a very good example is the incredible edible in Todmarden, where you can grow vegetables and you can encourage people to eat well and live well, and that's really good for our mental health and to be able to see green, etc. So absolutely, it's by creating really good places that actually that drives a really good engine to of good value to then provide affordable homes as well as other infrastructure as well.
Thank you, Nick. Adiola, I think this is probably a good one to put to you. And this is the question: what is the first thing I can encourage my church to do to get on board with this agenda?
That is a wonderful question, because that thought has always been in my head, that we have MPs, we have councillors, they all have surgeries. Why can't a church have a housing surgery? That is the first thing I would say to the person asking the question. Have a housing surgery. Let your community know you're here to help, that they can come in and have questions. But we are here to train the church. If you want to set it up, contact us. We can train you in order for you to have this surgery so that your community are able to come in and ask questions. That is the first thing. The first step is to get the training from Hope for All and then start your own surgery, and your community will be happy to come and ask questions about housing.
Thank you, Adiola. And kind of widening the lens a little bit and thinking a bit more nationally now, Archbishop Justin, can I put this one to you, please? How is the Church of England going to lead by example in utilising its own resources to help address the issues highlighted going forward?
Well, we're going to, Nick is going to help us a great deal with his team on that. I think the challenge is going to be in, first of all, mapping. I saw a question in the chat about can glebe land owned by dioceses that is set aside for all kinds of charitable purposes, can that be mapped? Well, the report talks about a mapping tool that they've developed, which will enable us to see where the land is, because one of the strange things about the Church of England, it's not an organization in any sense at all. And you quickly, if you work in it, stop calling it such. It's an institution with more than 20,000 bits and pieces. You've got the diocese, you've got things like the church commissioners who own about 6,000 acres of strategic developable land. Dioceses own a lot of land, parishes own land, trusts and charities attached to parishes own land, all kinds of bodies own land. And quite often we don't know that the field next door to the one that we own as the parish is actually owned by the church commissioners or whoever it happens to be. So first thing is to map. Second thing is there has to be a decision on the aims and objectives of the charities, because we're all charities, which in many ways has already been taken of not always seeking what technically is called best value. In other words, you don't go for top price the whole time. This is where sacrifice comes in. It doesn't mean you give it away. It means that it's done on an affordable basis. Third thing is we need to bring in expertise. This is where Nick and his team will come in. And the fourth thing, and I want to pick up with what was said by the previous panel and this one, and particularly I'm looking at Matthew on this, we need to build skills and partnerships with common values to make this happen.
Thank you very much. So moving on, I'm looking now to you, Nick, and this is the question. How do you balance the urgent need for using church land for new affordable homes and also meet the equally deep need for great quality community hubs and facilities, bringing people together and serving the local communities that we're committed to being part of.
Well, I think they go hand in hand because, again, if the mission here is about building community and engaging with communities, it's about actually saying to the community, what are the needs? What is going to help you thrive? And whether that be to provide some housing at an affordable rate, and whether we invest it, whether we hold on to it, or whatever. But I think it's all the time making it our mission to put community at the heart of any development. And it's not necessarily talking about housing developments on every site. It's about, you might have a community hub on a piece of church land, which is then cross-subsidized by doing some other housing, which is again very much community orientated on another piece of land. It's about perhaps taking a more strategic approach and looking at a whole portfolio to say, actually, how are we going to help not only in a diocese, but it's that cross-boundary. And that's why the church is working together to take a national perspective in doing good. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Nick. Matthew, this next question is bringing in more the rental perspective. And this is the question. The Community Land Trust and the community development model is exciting, but these houses still exist in a dysfunctional and failing housing market where rent and market prices are disproportionately high. Is there a place for higher regulation of the private rented sector through the enforcement of rent controls?
There is definitely opportunity for people-powered action to improve the private rented sector, and we've been working with Anglican churches and a range of diverse local communities, particularly on landlord licensing, because the really kind of hard end of that is people living in dangerously poor conditions. And so we've been, and that really is a matter of it tends to be that there is a local lobby against landlord licensing because it's perceived to be bureaucratic, unnecessary controls. But actually, if you can engage people and you can listen and you can organise and persuade local authorities to submit a proposal for landlord licensing and show there's actually popular support for a better, more dignified private rented sector, that is one way. I mean, at the moment, rent controls of the type that we see in other parts of the world are not possible legally here. And when we have been campaigning again around the definition of affordability, I mean, so-called affordable rent levels in high cost areas are not affordable. And so again, looking at that third of local average income model, we've set out a living rent policy. So there are a range of things to do. With some of that, the ambition of the person asking that question is not currently legal yet, but there's plenty that can be done.
Thank you, Matthew. Adiola, the Commissioner's report asks us all to play our part, each one of us. How can we inspire one another to do that?
As a community, as a church, we can inspire ourselves by making this an agenda in our churches, by speaking about it, by referring to it, by being knowledgeable, which is what I'm coming about again to talk about. Once we're trained, once we're properly informed, then we will be able to help our community. So each one of us as a church, to take it on board, this is a great initiative. We should even have a meeting on it in each church to say, let's go through these reports and see how we can be part of it, how we can then spread it over, because most people are not aware of what we're doing. I've shared it on Facebook. So everyone watching right now can continue to share it, can refer people to it to say, this is what is happening, and this will help to go a long way as individuals, as churches, as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like now to bring Charlie in, if I may, as chair of the Commission. And this is the question, Charlie. How can the church reassure itself that its agents and intermediaries genuinely respect the spirit and purpose of its social justice and community benefit policies?
Thank you. That's a great question, because I think we have our 5 values, and it's really important that if a church decides that it has some land that it can develop out, that it makes sure that it adheres to those 5 values. How can it then ensure that its partners are going to do that? That's part of a discussion. I think that the APPG on Faith and Society has been incredibly helpful in this, MP Stephen Timms, in setting out a faith covenant. Originally set up for all faith groups and local authorities, but now housing associations and churches very warmly welcomed into that. And it sets out a framework for basically good dialogue. And I think that gives all sides tremendous assurance as they start into negotiations that we're on the same page. So I think that gives an overall really positive framework. I would love to encourage local authorities, churches, other faith groups, housing associations, builders, developers, whoever, to sign up to that. Because it says at the outset of a conversation, we're both tracking in the same direction. We've got a framework for good discussion and good connection, good relationship. And then I think it'd be wonderful if churches said, we will only use our land in alignment with these 5 values.
Thank you. Archbishop Justin, this is a question about ecumenical and interfaith partners. And the question is, how is or how will the Church of England work with other denominations to share this work across the whole Christian community? And what about other faiths?
That again, I mean, the questions that we've had today have been really astonishingly good, really inspiring. It seems to me that as we start as Christians, we come with the attitude that Jesus had on the cross, which is a willingness to bear sacrifice, but also our arms outstretched in order to embrace. And that generosity of hospitality that is offered us by God is of welcoming us, of loving us, like the Father does in the story of the prodigal son. He runs to and embraces, sets the value for how we deal with other denominations and other faiths. Tragically, the Church of England has often been very, very bad at this, a sense of ineffable superiority, which is quite at odds with the reality of the servant king, of the Jesus who leads us. And so that has changed in our hearts, I hope, and perhaps Archbishop Stephen will talk about that at the end. But we start with a spirit of hospitality. Second, there has to be practical action, which means working through the networks we've got. And one of the things that struck me over the last year, particularly around the challenge of racial justice and inclusion, and the work that, for instance, Churches Together in England has done, which is all the churches in England, obviously enough, and also the interfaith groups, has been that when there's an opportunity for action and not just words, people get really excited and work together well. So I'm extremely hopeful we can do that. And I think, Gully, to throw the question back at you, this is going to be one of the things that I hope we work together on. And we will take very promptly. We've got endorsements from Churches Together in England. We've had some wonderful interfaith endorsements. Many of my friends in other faith communities are really enthused by this. And I'm sure we will be able to work together well. We have, the great thing about the Church of England is that we are in every community. And the local parish priests know their communities and serve them and love them. They've done that over the last year at great sacrifice and the worshipping communities. we will go on doing that, and they will build those links. We need to give them more skills. And funnily enough, I made a note of that a little while ago. But the hospitality and the welcome is fundamental to our understanding of what it means to be a Christian in our society today.
Thank you, Archbishop. Charlie, you want to add a brief word? The next question is coming to you anyway, but go ahead and add a brief word now.
I just wanted to say, yes, it's an aspiration, but it's also wonderfully already, to some extent, a reality on the ground. One of the people who helped us put together a lot of the information behind this report was a Methodist intern. So this wasn't just a Church of England ivory tower. And we've had lots of discussions with the Methodists who have land. And they are really keen to overlay their land on our land. We've mapped ours. They want to build that mapping into theirs. So that we might, to take Archbishop Justin's comment that a parish might own a field and discover the Church Commission is then the next door one. Actually, what we'd love to discover is if we own a field and the Methodists own the next one. But actually, we've also discovered that the Catholics have actually already done this mapping exercise. So we've got, there's already a lot happening, which is very exciting as to how we can do that. And then Archbishop Justin also mentioned some of the endorsements, and there was a very strong and very wonderful endorsement from the Chief Rabbi. So the opportunities to connect. Oh, and of course, St. George's in East London, where that Community Land Trust was put together with a local Muslim group. So the opportunities to connect across are wonderfully already happening, but let there be many, many more.
Thanks, Charlie. Nick.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add that in terms of collaborating with other landowners, it's really important to get across here that this is about building better homes, but it's also about respecting the environment too. And so in terms of looking at land ownership, we're also interested in working with partners to look after how we invest in the natural capital. So that is the quality of the soil, the water quality, the where we plant trees, how we capture carbon, because we are committed to net carbon neutral. We are committed to eradicating modern slavery, so we need to look at our supply chains and the builders and so forth. So all of this and the way that the fabric of our buildings, all of this comes together, but all of this is possible by working together and being visions in what we do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think I'm going to try and get one more question in. Charlie, this is for you. We've thought about the church at its most local and at its most national. This is a question about dioceses. Will dioceses be encouraged to shift their approach to development to take account of this report? At the moment, diocesan property teams tend to treat all development as being pursued in order to make money for the diocesan central budget. How can DACs and property teams include affordable housing provision as a significant factor in development plans?
That is such a great question. And I had an email from someone last night who'd got a long way down the track with an idea of a development on church land and then run into precisely this sort of problem. Wonderfully, we now have a central team who can help advise dioceses. Wonderfully, the evidence is clear that we can create social and economic value, social and environmental value and economic value. So this apparent dichotomy, do I lose lots of money to provide the common good, or do I make that's a false dichotomy. We can do this really well. I think I'd also like to say what we're not saying is that all dioceses need to find every scrap of land they can find and put a house on it. What we're talking about is good stewardship of land. So it means let's audit, for want of a better word, let's audit what we have. Let's ensure that everything we have is being used missionally in whatever form that might be. And as Nick has said, that might be a community hub because it's a community without a heart. So that might not be housing in that case, but it might be housing. But let's look at how we do this missionally. And I now think we have this huge question to ask, which is around, is the mission of the church better served by maximizing our income or better served by ministering to the community? And that's a tough question. I'm not in charge of the diocese, so I don't, but it is a question we have to grapple with. What is the gospel? Is it about making the numbers add up? Or is it about actually choosing to trust God with resources and minister to those in need around us? And this has got to be worked out on the ground. It's a tough question. We've actually got to take, okay, let's be more blunt. Where is our faith as diocese, if I'm going to be ruthless? Is it actually in knowing that the bank account has money in it? Or is it in God as provider? Again, it's easy for me to say that from the outside, but personally, each of us has to grapple with that question. We certainly do, as my family, my household. It's an ongoing question. Where is our trust? Where is our faith? Where's our rootedness? Where's our identity? We've all got to work that through.
Thank you, Charlie. That's excellent. I'm sorry, really, but the clock has beaten us. We have run out of time. I'd like to give the opportunity just to Matthew and Adiola. If you'd like to say something very brief by way of closing remarks, just 10, 15 seconds each, that would be lovely. Adiola.
Thank you very much, Bishop Colley. I would just like to say inclusiveness, diversity, and equality. When the church portrays these attributes, it will give the community confidence to approach the church for anything, and people will feel more valued. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you, Adiola. And Matthew.
Just to say, there's a lot of talk about value and value as money value and other values. And what was so great about this report is there are 5 values in the report, and that provides a platform for partnership. It provides an alternative frame for a discussion with the people who count the money. Just to say that, as I say, what we would hope to offer here is the ingredient of, whether it's through a housing surgery or through a listening campaign, how do we open up the repertoire for local churches, as well as providing support and advice to people in need, to actually be part of systemic change and to make housing happen in that place. And it's not easy. There'll be plenty of barriers, and it does require and create the opportunity for real leadership development and partnership building, and that's a great opportunity, as well as the homes that will be built.
Thank you, Matthew. And so just for me to say my own personal thanks to all the panelists and those who've participated. And the only thing now that remains for me is to hand over to the Archbishop of York for some closing remarks. Archbishop Stephen.
Sisters and brothers, Bishop Gooley, Justin, Charlie and others who've been so involved with this commission and with the webinar this morning. First of all, a huge thank you, which I'm sure expresses the thanks of everybody who's participated today and the lives that are going to be changed through this work. A big thank you. Pretty much every country in Europe somewhere has a shrine to Our Lady, to Mary, the mother of Jesus. The most famous English shrine to Our Lady is in Walsingham in Norfolk. In the year 1061, a Saxon noblewoman, Richeldis, had a vision of the Virgin Mary. But unlike the usual visions, in this vision, she was asked to build a house. And the vision said, very specific, build a house which is like a replica of the home in Nazareth where Jesus grew up. And for those of you who've been to Walsingham in Norfolk, that shrine, the Anglican shrine and the Roman Catholic shrine, were restored in, I think, the 1920s. The anniversary is coming up. And when you go to that Marian shrine, what you visit is a little house to remind yourself that at the heart of the Christian faith is the knowledge and the belief that God shares our life. And therefore the things of the earth, households, homes, communities, they really matter. And I want to stand alongside what Charlie was saying a minute ago. This is about the soul of the Church of England and the soul of our nation. It is a scandal to God that there are homeless people on our street. It is a scandal that there are so many hidden homeless. It is a scandal that many cannot afford to live in the communities where they grow up. And we must change that. And Jesus says, warns us of the danger of gaining the whole world and losing your soul. And I don't want to be part of a very well-organized Church of England with a healthy bank balance and all of that, if at the same time we have neglected our vocation to reach out to all our communities, to the poorest in our communities, and make sure that in every community there are homes. And therefore, I think what we are part of today is a great sign of hope for the soul of our church and for the soul of our nation. And I'm humbled and happy to stand alongside those who are doing such good things for the life of our nation. Sorry, I'm a preacher man, not an expert in anything else. So I don't know how to end anything without saying amen. But of course, the word amen means I agree. Sisters and brothers, I am in agreement with what we're doing here today, and I ask God to richly bless it. Thank you.